Welcome to It's Not Well in China, where we explore some of the most shocking and underreported true crime cases from China and involving Chinese people around the world. I'm Robin.
And I'm Noah. Today we're diving into a harrowing case that's rocked both China and the Philippines. Just 4 months ago, in June 2024, two senior executives from China's medical industry, on what seemed like an ordinary business trip, were abducted in the Philippines. The nightmare didn't end there. Days later, their bodies were discovered, brutally marking the beginning of a story that unfolds into a chilling transnational crime.
And as horrifying as this case is, it isn't isolated. After this crime captured media attention, two more eerily similar cases began to emerge, each one more disturbing than the last. These crimes have cast a dark shadow over international business travel, especially for those venturing into Southeast Asia. So, let's dive into how this tragic story began. It all started with Jimmy Sun, a 45-year-old Chinese American and the owner of a medical device distribution company based in Beijing. Jimmy's career path actually began back in the US at the University of California, Irvine, where he earned his degree in pharmaceutical chemistry. Standing at 1.9 meters, with the build of a fitness coach, which he once was part-time, Jimmy was known as an outgoing, loyal friend and a devoted father to his two kids. He had every hallmark of success.
Then we have Xia Qifu, a 39-year-old Chinese national who, like Jimmy, had built a successful career. Xia was the international marketing director for RainMed Medical, a company specializing in cutting-edge vascular intervention surgery robots. Xia was dedicated to his young family and was known for his warmth and dedication both at home and in his career.
Jimmy and Xia crossed paths at the prestigious EuroPCR conference in Paris, a key event for the interventional cardiology field that brings together top professionals from around the world. As they got to know each other, they realized they had a lot in common. Both were in the same medical field, both were driven by success, and both had ambitions to expand their businesses internationally.
Exactly. And it was at this conference where they met Lena, who worked with Medev, a medical company based in the Philippines. Lena was a woman of Chinese descent, fluent in Mandarin, and she seemed like a trustworthy connection. Jimmy had crossed paths with her before and introduced her to Xia at the event. On the surface, Lena was the ideal business contact, knowledgeable, connected, and eager to help.
Lena presented herself as someone with serious credentials. She described Medev as a rapidly growing medical device distributor in the Philippines, led by Mr. Hong, a prominent businessman originally from China's Fujian province, who transitioned from real estate to the medical industry. According to Lena, Medev's annual sales topped $50 million. And to sweeten the deal, Lena mentioned that Mr. Hong had strong political connections in the Philippines. She claimed he was a major supporter of Philippine President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr.'s 2022 campaign, which had helped Medev secure valuable government contracts for medical device procurement. That kind of influence could really open doors for their businesses. She told Jimmy and Xia that Medev was looking to partner with hospitals in Manila and had plans to expand into other provinces in the next year. The opportunity seemed promising, especially for Jimmy and Xia, who were both eager to tap into the Philippine market. Lena promised to follow up with Medev's company information and even an invitation to visit the Philippines for a more detailed discussion.
And here's the thing. Lena wasn't bluffing. Medev is a real company. According to its website, it was founded in 1999, employs around 50 people, and focuses on distributing cardiovascular medical devices, aligning perfectly with the products Jimmy and Xia's companies offered. Medev even had partnerships with Chinese medical firms in the past. Everything checked out.
Yes, there were no red flags. After the conference, they all stayed in touch. Lena followed through, sending Jimmy and Xia all the necessary documents, Medev's operating license, credentials, and eventually an official invitation signed by the CEO. It looked like a legitimate opportunity, and they were ready to take the next step, visiting the Philippines. On June 20th, Jimmy and Xia boarded Philippine Airlines flight PR359 from Beijing Capital Airport at 12:55 p.m. Their destination? Manila, Philippines. Lena had assured them that everything was arranged, even down to a company driver who'd be waiting to pick them up.
Jimmy, though, was cautious. Before takeoff, he sent Medev's company information and his entire chat history with Lena from WeChat to his assistant, just in case. To everyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary business trip, but Jimmy wasn't about to take any risks. By 5:50 p.m., their plane touched down in Manila, and at 6:07, Shia texted his colleagues to confirm he'd collected his luggage and arrived safely. Shortly after landing, it's assumed they connected with the driver Lena had arranged. By 6:50 p.m., they were in the car, and Jimmy, still careful, took a photo of the driver, a masked man, and sent it to his assistant along with a reassuring message. "Looks like a good guy." But that was the last anyone heard from them. Later that evening, when their families and colleagues tried to reach out, they were met with nothing but silence. And in that silence, a creeping sense of dread began to take hold.
Now let's dive into what happened next, the truly chilling part. It was midday on June 21st, just a day after Jimmy and Shia had landed in Manila. Shia's wife, Ms. Tang, received a WeChat call from her husband, but immediately, something was off. Alongside Shia's voice, she heard a stranger's voice, low and threatening. This man claimed that Shia had lost a significant amount of money gambling at a local club and demanded an immediate wire transfer to settle his so-called debt. Tang knew instantly that something wasn't right. Shia wasn't the gambling type. The calls kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. The stranger's threats grew violent, warning that if the money wasn't sent, Shia's life was on the line. Tang's instincts told her this wasn't about gambling at all. Something far darker was unfolding. She suspected her husband had been kidnapped. Without hesitation, Tang contacted the Chinese police and the Chinese embassy in the Philippines. Through the embassy, she alerted the Philippine authorities and even reached out directly to the Anti-Kidnapping Group, or AKG.
For those unfamiliar, the AKG is a specialized unit within the Philippine National Police, focused solely on kidnapping cases. With kidnappings on the rise, especially targeting Chinese nationals, the AKG was created to respond with hostage rescue, suspect apprehension, and prevention strategies. Their mission is critical, but as this case unfolds, we'll see just how complex these efforts can be.
But the nightmare didn't end there. That same afternoon, Jimmy's assistant received a WeChat call from Jimmy himself. Jimmy sounded strained, almost frantic. He explained, "There's a bit of a problem here," and said he urgently needed 15 million yuan, around $2.1 million US, converted into USDT, a type of cryptocurrency, and transferred immediately.
Now for context, USDT, or Tether, is a cryptocurrency pegged to the US dollar, known for its stability and liquidity. But Jimmy's company had never used cryptocurrency for transfers, especially not for such a huge sum. And here's the kicker. They had no idea who the recipient even was.
The assistant was immediately suspicious and requested a video call to confirm, but Jimmy refused, explaining that he'd lost money playing cards the night before. The thing is, Jimmy wasn't known to gamble, just like Shia. His family couldn't remember a time he'd even bought a lottery ticket.
That's when Jimmy's family knew something was terribly wrong. They delayed the transfer and contacted the police in Beijing. Over the next few hours, Jimmy made several more calls, each one more distressing. His speech grew confused, his tone inconsistent, likely a sign of the torture he was enduring at the hands of his kidnappers.
At one point, Jimmy claimed he needed 5 million yuan, about $700,000 US, to save Shia. Then, when asked if he was in danger himself, he changed the story, saying he needed the same amount for his own ransom. Minutes later, he insisted he was fine and could leave soon after buying a ticket. It was heartbreaking. His assistant asked for a screenshot of the ticket, but Jimmy went silent. Later, he sent another message asking if the money had been transferred, and his family responded that they could only gather around 200,000 yuan, about $28,000 US.
Jimmy's reply was chilling. He said he'd feel better if they sent the money, but when they asked directly if he was being tortured, he denied it. Moments later, he mentioned that paying part of the money would at least get him some water to drink. His responses became more erratic, leaving his family desperate and confused. The kidnappers were clearly using psychological pressure to break both Jimmy and Shia's families. They kept the ransom demands high, changed the story constantly, and left everyone unsure of what to believe. Meanwhile, time was slipping away, and their fear only intensified.
And now, things took an even darker turn. Jimmy, being a US passport holder, was technically an American citizen, which gave his family the option to reach out to US authorities. One of Jimmy's friends in Los Angeles, realizing the urgency, reported the kidnapping to the FBI office responsible for overseas citizen safety. This happened at midnight on June 22nd, Beijing time, 9 a.m. on Friday in Los Angeles.
But here's the frustrating part. When Jimmy's friend called the FBI, they hit a voicemail system. Imagine the desperation. A loved one is in immediate danger, and all you get is an automated recording. The friend left a message, and finally, an agent called back, asking for basic details like Jimmy's passport number and the location of the kidnapping. They assured the family they'd respond, but only within 1 or 2 working days. No urgency, no immediate follow-up.
Meanwhile, Jimmy's family also contacted the US Embassy in the Philippines, but by that point it was already Saturday, June 22nd local time. And here's where the frustration peaked. The embassy was closed for the weekend. The only officer on duty promised to file a report, but warned that any real action would have to wait until Monday. Imagine the family's despair at this point. Every minute was crucial, but they were being told to wait until the start of the work week. After several pleas, the duty officer managed to alert Philippine authorities, but even then, the local police response was underwhelming. They took down the basics but showed no immediate urgency.
Jimmy's family quickly realized the kidnappers had planned this meticulously. By having Jimmy and Shia arrive on a Thursday, the kidnappers exploited the weekend delay. They began their demands right as offices closed, knowing response times would be slow. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic limitations. The timing was almost diabolical. With the weekend underway, the kidnappers had a limited but powerful window to apply pressure, demand ransoms, and disappear before anyone could fully respond. It's terrifying to think that these criminals not only had the resources to pull off such a kidnapping, but also understood how to manipulate systemic weaknesses.
For Jimmy's family, it was a helpless, agonizing realization. They were doing everything possible, contacting embassies, reaching out to the FBI, but the slow-moving bureaucracy was failing them at every turn. Imagine realizing that the very people who could help were unreachable, bogged down by red tape and weekend closures.
It's a nightmare. The kidnappers knew they had just enough time to extort money and vanish before authorities could react. They exploited the delay masterfully. It makes you wonder just how many cases hinge on the criminals' timing, taking advantage of system delays to achieve their deadly goals.
Absolutely. This case exposes the horrifying reality that the brutality of the crime is often compounded by the flaws in the system, flaws that can have life-altering consequences. By Sunday morning at 7 a.m., Jimmy made what would be his final voice call. He sounded desperate, asking his family for just 200,000 yuan, about $28,000, saying it would at least get him some water.
At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Jimmy sent his final WeChat message, a heartbreaking plea to his mother. "Mom, could you send some money over first?" And with that, all communication from Jimmy ceased.
Meanwhile, the kidnappers turned their attention to Shia's family, speaking in Mandarin with a Fujianese accent as they aggressively negotiated a ransom. They finally agreed on 3 million yuan, roughly $408,000. But here's the eerie part. Neither family received any assistance from the Philippine police, yet somehow the kidnappers seemed to know everything.
Exactly. They dropped chilling lines like, "I know you've already gone to the police, and because you reported it, we don't have much time left. And then, by Monday, when the police are back on duty, we'll be gone." How could they have known?
The families began to suspect the unthinkable, that someone within the Philippine police might have tipped off the kidnappers. This suspicion wasn't without basis. Just 2 weeks earlier, on June 5th, another incident raised similar concerns. That day, a luxury car carrying 4 tourists, including 3 Chinese nationals, was pulled over by what appeared to be motorcycle police. But it wasn't a routine stop. The police were working with civilian accomplices. They cuffed the tourists and attempted to force them into a van. Thankfully, 2 of the Chinese tourists managed to escape and raise the alarm. But the remaining 2 weren't as fortunate. They were brutally beaten and only released after paying a ransom of 2.5 million pesos, about $45,000. Thanks to testimonies and CCTV footage, 4 police officers were later arrested, including one who was a police chief.
It's the kind of revelation that makes your stomach drop. To think that those tasked with protecting you might actually be part of the crime. It's horrifying. And for Jimmy and Shia's families, the implications were clear. Trust in the authorities was a dangerous gamble.
Meanwhile, the kidnappers were racing against the clock, knowing the weekend was coming to an end. They manipulated the family's fear expertly, playing on the delays, the bureaucratic gaps, and their own insider knowledge to maintain control. It's harrowing to think about.
Absolutely. This case forces you to confront just how vulnerable international travelers can be, not only to criminals but also to corruption within law enforcement. The betrayal and helplessness here are almost beyond comprehension.
When the families realized they couldn't rely on the authorities alone, they took matters into their own hands. On the night of June 25th, they boarded a flight to Manila, resolved to search for Jimmy and Shia themselves. They had raised funds, fueled by desperate hope, knowing that every lead and every bit of information would come at a cost. Once they landed in Manila, the families wasted no time. They met with officials from the anti-kidnapping group, 2 FBI agents who had flown in from Washington, and staff from the Chinese embassy. It felt like they were finally making progress. But then came news that would shatter any remaining hope. Just the day before, on June 24th, in the small town of Patitinan, located more than 500 kilometers away from Manila in the province of Camarines Sur, local fishermen had stumbled upon a horrifying sight. Around 11:20 a.m., they found 2 bodies wrapped tightly in blankets lying by the lakeside. When the anti-kidnapping group heard about the discovery, they feared the worst.
The families, already on edge, hurried to this remote town. First, they took a flight from Manila to a nearby city, then endured a 2.5-hour drive to finally reach the town. Upon arrival, their worst nightmare was confirmed. After identifying the bodies, there was no doubt. The victims were Jimmy and Shia.
The police autopsy confirmed the brutal reality. Both men had died from suffocation, but not before enduring horrific torture. Whoever committed these crimes was meticulous, very meticulous. There were no fingerprints, no stray hairs, no traces left behind. It was a disposal carried out with chilling precision.
And as if to erase all traces, the kidnappers had even taken their phones, leaving no digital trail. Following the autopsy, the bodies were cremated locally, with their ashes entrusted to the grieving families, a devastating end to a journey that had begun with such hope.
Imagining the grief these families felt is almost impossible. They had come to the Philippines clinging to the hope that they'd find their loved ones alive. Instead, they were met with the unthinkable. Their loved ones had been brutally taken from them, in what had started as a promising business trip, but ended in tragedy beyond words.
This case wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a calculated, cold-blooded operation that robbed 2 families of fathers, friends, and respected businessmen. And as the story unfolds, we see just how deeply unsettling and complex the forces behind this crime truly are.
After their tragic deaths, the families of Shia and Jimmy were left with the monumental task of bringing them home. Shia's ashes arrived back in China, where they were received by the chairman of RainMed, the company Shia had devoted so much of his life to.
RainMed honored Shia's memory with a public obituary on June 30th, describing him as a responsible, outstanding leader who was sincere in his dealings, a man dedicated to his work and respected by all who knew him. It was a small but heartfelt tribute to someone who had made a lasting impact.
A day later, on July 1st, Jimmy's family released their own statement. On June 24, 2024, our beloved Jimmy passed away unexpectedly at the age of 45. He was genuine, kind, and always full of life, bringing endless warmth to everyone around him. It was a simple message but filled with deep emotion. On July 6th, a farewell ceremony for Jimmy was held at Babaoshan Funeral Home in Beijing, drawing more than 100 friends and family. Many who attended had known him for over a decade, and they shared memories that highlighted the incredible life Jimmy led.
According to Sanlian Life Week magazine, Jimmy's colleagues in the medical field spoke highly of his contributions. He had introduced advanced medical devices into China, like the mitral valve clip, an innovation that helped patients avoid the trauma of open-heart surgery particularly those who were elderly or had other health conditions. It's a legacy that won't be forgotten. But Jimmy wasn't just known for his work. He was described as the life of any gathering, always bringing joy to those around him. He loved to sing, crack jokes, and be in the middle of the fun. After his memorial service, friends gathered at a restaurant, filling 8 or 9 tables to honor his memory in the way he would have wanted, with laughter, stories, and camaraderie.
And as Sanley and Lifeweek poignantly put it, on that day, Jimmy was still the center of attention among his friends, only this time, in a different way. It was a final, heartfelt goodbye to a man whose warmth and spirit touched so many.
It's heartbreaking to see lives like Jimmy's and Shia's cut short in such a tragic way. Both men left a lasting impact on those around them, both professionally and personally. This story isn't just about a crime. It's about the lives taken and the people who will never forget them.
On July 2nd, with the weight of international attention bearing down, the Chinese embassy in the Philippines issued a formal statement. They urged local authorities to intensify their investigation and reminded Chinese nationals visiting the Philippines to be vigilant about their safety. The shock of Jimmy and Shia's deaths had rippled far beyond their immediate families.
Not long after, Medev, the company that supposedly invited Jimmy and Shia to the Philippines, released a statement that only deepened the mystery. They clarified that the invitation letters given to Jimmy and Shia were forged and insisted they had no employee named Lena. Medev firmly denied any involvement, expressing sympathy for the victims' families, but also distancing themselves from the entire situation.
Then, on July 3rd, there was a glimmer of hope. Reports from the Philippine Bureau of Immigration announced the arrest of a pregnant Chinese woman at an apartment in Pasay City, Metro Manila. She was the alleged leader of a kidnapping and extortion ring, and suspicions ran high that she could be the elusive Lena, the person who had lured Jimmy and Shia to the Philippines.
But those hopes were short-lived. After some investigation, the police ruled out her involvement in Jimmy and Shia's case. While she was connected to another kidnapping case, she wasn't linked to their tragic deaths. It was a frustrating setback for investigators and the families alike. Finally, by July 9th, the Philippine National Police spokesperson John Fajardo announced that authorities had identified 8 suspects connected to the kidnapping and murder of Jimmy and Shia. Among them was the driver who had picked them up from the airport that fateful day. The group consisted of both Filipino nationals and foreigners, underscoring the complexity and international reach of this crime.
And while these identifications brought some clarity, it wasn't the resolution the families had hoped for. Fajardo stated that the police were collaborating with international law enforcement agencies to gather more evidence. But as of that announcement, no arrests had been made. The search for justice was far from over. It's a painful reminder of how long and grueling the road to justice can be, especially in cases with international entanglements. Jimmy and Shia's families, along with authorities, continue to seek answers and accountability for the loss of 2 lives that should never have ended this way.
As the horrifying details of the Jimmy and Shia case spread, it quickly became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. 2 eerily similar cases surfaced, each one as chilling as the last. Let's go back to 2019. 2 Chinese businessmen who held Cypriot citizenship met a Chinese real estate mogul at a European trade show. This mogul was based in the Philippines and presented a tempting offer, an investment in Philippine real estate, complete with property listings and project plans. Intrigued, the 2 businessmen accepted his invitation to visit the Philippines.
But when they arrived at Manila Airport, everything took a dark turn. They received a call directing them to meet someone at the baggage claim area. From that moment, they vanished. Later, it was revealed that the spot where they were picked up had no CCTV coverage, almost as if the kidnappers knew exactly where to strike. The businessmen were taken to a safe house in Cavite province, where their passports, phones, and belongings were confiscated. Their families eventually paid nearly $1 million in ransom through USDT cryptocurrency, and only then were they released. Understandably traumatized, they refused to return to the Philippines to file a case. Instead, the founding chair of the Movement for the Restoration of Peace and Order, or MRPO, Teresita Angsi, and a colleague flew to Beijing to help the victims give their statements. They met with officers from the anti-kidnapping group and the then Philippine ambassador to China notarized their testimonies. Yet despite these efforts, the kidnappers remain at large to this day.
The MRPO, for context, is a civic organization in the Philippines dedicated to tackling kidnapping and extortion crimes, particularly those affecting the Chinese community. They've been invaluable in supporting victims and their families, as this isn't the only case they've seen unfold.
To explain, these Cyprus Chinese businessmen are essentially Chinese tycoons who hold Cypriot nationality, often for ease of travel and other advantages. Through Cyprus's citizenship by investment program, many wealthy Chinese individuals can obtain a Cypriot passport by purchasing property worth at least €2 million.
Then, in January of this year, a similar case took place. A woman named Hui, the sister of one of the victims, shared her story with the media. Her brother, Jia, a Chinese citizen and senior executive based in Germany, was kidnapped alongside his Austrian Chinese friend after being invited to the Philippines for a business opportunity. Hui believes that if her brother's case had been publicized sooner, it might have deterred the kidnappers and prevented further harm.
Jia's story involved a man he referred to as Big Brother, a Chinese man with multiple passports, a northern Chinese accent, and ties to wealthy Chinese business circles. Big Brother had been in regular contact with Jia, even moving near his home in Germany and introducing him to Ms. A Chinese woman claiming to be an assistant to a Filipino-Chinese businessman.
Ms. A seemed legitimate, offering Jia well-prepared asset information and investment options. Ever cautious, Jia even had the company details she provided verified by an agency in Germany. Everything appeared to be above board. But on January 18th, Jia and his friend flew to the Philippines, only to be kidnapped shortly after landing.
After an initial ransom payment of around 190,000 USDT, Jia's family lost contact with him on January 25th. His friend Dong managed to speak to his own family briefly, but then also disappeared. Negotiations stretched over a week, with Big Brother himself assisting in exchanging currency and coordinating ransom payments. Even after Jia disappeared, he stayed in touch with Hui for another 10 days, leaving her with questions but no answers.
The parallels between these cases are striking. Both kidnappings happened on a Thursday spanning the weekend, a tactic to delay police response. Ransoms were demanded in USDT, and a Chinese woman played a key role in both cases. It seems almost too similar to be a coincidence.
After Jia and Dong's kidnappings were reported, authorities from China, the Philippines, Austria, and Germany got involved. But the investigation was shrouded in confidentiality. The Chinese embassy in the Philippines confirmed their collaboration with local authorities, yet declined to share any specifics. Austrian and German police cited similar constraints, adding layers of complexity and frustration to the case.
It's as if the kidnappers vanished without a trace, leaving behind only heartbreak and unanswered questions. The methods, timing, and international connections all point to a well-organized network, one that knows how to exploit the gaps in cross-border law enforcement.
This chilling trend reveals a dark undercurrent in international business dealings, one where high-profile individuals are targeted, lured, and ultimately vanished into a world where justice seems just out of reach. It's a reminder that in these cases, safety and vigilance are often all that stand between life and unimaginable loss.
A breakthrough finally arrived 2 months later. On September 22nd, Philippine police informed the families of Jimmy and Shia that they had made an arrest. The woman who went by Lena, who lured the victims to the Philippines, had been detained in South Korea on the same day.
This was huge news. Since South Korea has an extradition agreement with China, Lena, whose real name is actually Chen Yu-Suan, a 44-year-old born in Taipei, will be sent back to China to face trial. She was travelling on a Taiwanese passport, but sources indicate that Chen Yu-Suan is more than just Lena. She's also believed to be Ms. A, the woman involved in the kidnappings of Jia and Dong. Chen's arrest has shined a light on what might be a much larger network. Police across several countries are reportedly searching for additional suspects, hoping to dismantle the entire operation. Kidnappings of Chinese nationals in the Philippines and Southeast Asia are not uncommon, but these cases are unusual.
That's right, Robin. Since 2010, many kidnappings of Chinese citizens have been linked to the gambling industry and online scams across Southeast Asia. Casinos have been known to trap Chinese tourists in massive gambling debts, resorting to kidnapping to extort money from their families. In northern Myanmar, online scam syndicates use fake job offers to lure victims, who are then forced into scams or held for ransom if their families don't pay up.
But these three cases stand apart. There's no connection to gambling or online fraud here. Instead, we're seeing organised transnational crime rings targeting high-net-worth business people, particularly those who live abroad or hold foreign citizenship.
These networks operate with frightening precision. They start by sending someone to build a close relationship with the victim in Europe, armed with credible company information, legitimate-looking investment proposals, and even official invitation letters. Once they've gained the victim's trust, they lure them to the Philippines under the guise of a business meeting.
And targeting victims in Europe isn't random. It's a calculated move. Europe's Schengen zone allows easy movement across multiple countries, which makes it harder to trace these criminals. With a Schengen visa, a syndicate member could enter Europe through one country, say Denmark, then travel to France or Germany to meet the victim. Even if they use their real identity initially, tracking them afterward becomes almost impossible.
Then they add another layer of complexity, timing the kidnappings over the weekend to delay law enforcement response, and demanding ransom payments in cryptocurrency like USDT, which is difficult to trace. All signs suggest these crimes are the work of the same well-organized transnational group.
With Chen's arrest, there's finally hope that authorities can pull back the curtain on this criminal network and bring its members to justice. As more details unfold, we'll be keeping a close eye on the case and updating our listeners on any new developments.
Absolutely, Robin. This case has highlighted the risks faced by international business people in today's interconnected world, and the lengths these criminal networks are willing to go to exploit them. Thank you to everyone listening, and we'll be back soon with more updates. Until then, stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay safe.